example, like I had this idea, unfortunately we never executed yet, of like having, for example, an open source medical device where you kind of say like, cool, this software is on the market as a medical device, it's software as a medical device. But the entire source code is open source, and even the technical file and the quality management system of the company is open source. So literally
Oh,
everything's open source. And I think that would be really cool if that would be also a class 2A or higher product, because then it would go through a notified body approval. And now you could kind of say like, now another
yeah,
company could say like, hey, we take this open source medical device and make,
yeah,
let's say, minor changes to it and go to
yeah.
another notified body. And that notified body is in a very now interesting position, because if they don't want to approve this, they will need very good reasoning, because you can literally say, well, that's the documentation which got approved by this other notified body with minor changes. And I think it would be such a great initiative.
Yeah. Wouldn't the issue, and I'm not trying to shut down your idea, right? I'm just taking the
Yeah,
other side of the argument.
you
So
can also shoot it
wouldn't
down.
no, I actually think it's a brilliant idea to have this open source, almost like a template, right, for people to be able to
Right.
build on and change and stuff. But isn't the issue that every new application is seen as a new application? So there's not really like this equivalence type of thing. Well, if there is, then you have to
Hmm.
show that it's exactly the same and not,
Yeah,
so how wouldn't the notified body still tell you, for example, well, you still need to give clinical data for this
for
specific one,
sure.
although
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
same
for sure. Exactly.
as
Yeah,
that one,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. I think that definitely. I mean, my reasoning would be very informal. Like, you wouldn't really use this as an equivalent device. For example, you wouldn't say like, "Hey, this
Okay.
is the equivalent device in my clinical evaluation," but instead you would actually say, "Look, this open source device passed the notified body. I don't know, TÜV or whatever," and then
Yeah.
and you can literally point to the changes. Like, our device only differs in these two areas. So
Yeah.
if you kind of have a problem with our device, like bringing it to market, and certainly a new device, like legally, but if now this notified body has a problem bringing our device to market, it can actually only point to these two changes, because the other device got
Mhm.
approved without those two changes. So I think that would be
Ah,
the powerful part of it.
but okay, there's another thing, right? Because again, doesn't the notified body look at this as if all the other devices didn't exist? So it wouldn't know
For sure.
that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
open source one exists, but it does present an interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
conundrum
I mean,
because
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Right now,
because now this thing is open
and that
source.
that's exactly that's the state in which we're right now, right? Every notified body looks at each device and kind of like pretends this is a new device, and they haven't seen any
Yeah,
other device,
which is a bit,
kind of, right?
it is a bit like silly in a sense because surely, like in our example, if all the information is already out there for open source device, if I'm an auditor at a notified body, I might want to look at that just to,
Right.
yeah, it seems weird that it almost seems like they're creating more work for themselves. If
Hmm.
for each new device, although they could be 500 of the same type of device, they will still treat this as a completely
Yeah,
new. That seems like super weird to me.
for sure.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. It's such a good point, and I think it's so interesting because this makes the system so inefficient. Like, if a notified body,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
notified bodies right now, they kind of say like, hey, we need, I don't know, a couple of weeks to review your technical file. And then I would be like, well, yes, with the current processes, you need a couple of weeks, because everyone hands in their custom formatted PDFs, which is a huge mess generally, and it would like export
yeah.
it from some tool, and then you have like a person who has to manually like sift through these PDFs. Of course, that's going to take a couple of weeks. But if there would be like a more structured approach where you say like, maybe there's like a device on the market, but the same notified body approved by them, and you only show like, hey, our device actually only differs in these few things, you could approve it in like an hour, like in theory, of course, right? If you would reduce the work, that would be like, in my
Wow, that
opinion, that
would
would be a
be,
really smart approach.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, right, unfortunately, that's not the road we're going down right now. I mean, right now it's like towards like, oh my god, we need more notified bodies, we need more auditors in the notified bodies, and that's only going to add like very incremental capacity, and I think that'll be
yeah.
very hard.
Because I mean, if you think about things like machine learning and AI, for example, right, where if you if you use the current process of certifying devices, like you can only have so many auditors to look at all the data that's needed for AI and
Right.
machine learning, for example, right? So it's
Yeah.
almost getting to a point where the notified bodies will have to implement some sort of AI themselves in order to be able
Yeah.
to assess the AI that, because how do
Yeah.
you assess AI without having software for it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true, and I think it's a huge problem. I think, and you could even take this problem one level higher and say like, well, software. It's not just AI software or machine learning software. It's
Hmm.
software in general. Like software in general is
Yeah.
becoming very very complex, and now if I ask myself how many smart, really smart software people do I know who would love to work at a notified body, that number is kind of zero. And unfortunately, because like they would prefer
Yeah.
to work at Google because I don't know stuff's interesting there. So, and I think that's
Hmm.
very, very dangerous because that means you don't really have an incentivation for smart software people to work in notified bodies. So you will have some, let's just say, maybe less smart software people,
Yeah.
and they should now wade through this documentation of a complex software system. And I think that's probably just not a good setup, which is going to work well.